Putting aside both the huge budget this film had and, of course, its infamous backstage problems, to just concentrate on the actual film itself, Disney's The Lone Ranger. It is nowhere near as much of a disaster as it could have been. Although some people do see it as that, to me, it's actually not as bad as I was expecting. Granted, it does have a lot of problems. But then again, it's also pretty fun in places as well. Adapted, of course, from the old-timey TV series, The Lone Ranger stars Johnny Depp and Armie Hammer as the title role. Johnny Depp, of course, plays Tonto with the dead bird on his head, but you probably knew that already. It's directed by Gore Verbinski, and it is produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. Of course, all of these allude to connections to the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, which it kind of has a little bit of that in it, but it's also a little bit better as well, which is kind of a big compliment, really. The film's plot is, to begin with at least, very pretty straightforward, and the first half an hour is actually really great. It's kind of after that half hour ends that things begin to get a little bit convoluted and a little bit tangled. The whole premise of the film is that John Reed is a lawyer who is returning home from law school after graduating and becoming an official lawman, and he's coming back to where his brother lives, whose brother is a Texas Ranger, and he's kind of revered as a hero. His brother is also married and the father to a child who is the child of John's first love, and you see what I mean, it's already getting a little bit tangled. Throw in the fact that you have Tom Wilkinson, who is just brilliant in everything he does, pretty much building a railroad across the country and the development of the West, and you've got tensions between the sort of cowboys and the Native Americans, and you can already tell that there's just so much going on. Plus there is the hunt for a man who eats human hearts, which gets me onto my main issue with The Lone Ranger, is that it doesn't really know what it wants to be. It doesn't know which audience it's directing itself towards to, and that is very representative of its tone and the way that it's actually executed. In parts, the film is actually really kind of funny and goofy and silly and all that, and it kind of seems like it's appealing towards children, and you've got that whole adventure aspect of it which works and is great because it appeals towards kids. But then you have the darker aspects, people eating hearts, magic, you also have like a social statement which is very sort of pro-Native American, which is actually quite a brave decision to take, but I kind of feel like that maybe is not entirely matched with the direction you're going for, if it is in fact aiming to appeal towards children. For me, this was the main problem because it just doesn't really feel like it is comfortable in its own skin, and it seems to keep switching and changing, and it's not entirely sure of who it is and what it wants to be and who it's aiming itself towards. There are also other big problems, the fact that it is like 2 hours and 20 minutes, and there's a perfect ending point where you could have made it much more simpler and shorter and more streamlined at about the 90-minute mark, and you kind of think, well, if you'd wrap this up now, you would have had a much tighter film on your hands, but it goes on for like nearly another hour, and it just kind of feels really long and stretched out and strained, and unnecessarily so, to be honest. Also, just the convolution of so many characters and so many ideas thrown into the pot. It's got a lot of good ideas, but there's just too many of them to make it like work as one cohesive film. And for me, another issue is Armie Hammer, who is not exactly the best leading man. Johnny Depp does his Johnny Depp thing perfectly fine and actually has some of the better moments in the film as Tonto, and he's not as horrible as the first trailer initially suggested he might be. He's actually pretty good, and in a way he kind of carries Armie Hammer for most of the film, because if I'm being honest, Armie Hammer isn't very charismatic, and he's not a very interesting screen presence at all. So it's Johnny Depp that does a lot of the heavy lifting in the film, and if it wasn't for him, I don't think it would be quite as enjoyable. I also think if Gore Verbinski wasn't on board to direct, if it had been put in the hands of another director, the film wouldn't be as good as it is. Not that it's fantastic, it is middle of the road for the most part because of the way the pros and cons balance themselves out, but there are some really nice little flourishes and little sequences that Verbinski puts in, plus it looks beautiful as well, I must give it that. So because of Depp's presence and Verbinski's directorial little nuances and touches, it is a lot better than I was expecting it to be, but at the same time it does have a lot of problems which bogs it down to a middle grade score for me. I'm going to give it a 5. It's not bad, it's not good, it's decent. And, there's something to be said about that, I think.